Hello and welcome to the New Moon Tarot reading for the new moon that falls at 6 minutes past 7 in the morning on Monday the 20th of February. That's in the morning UK time, so it could be earlier or later depending on where you are in the world. For those of you who want to skip straight to the reading, I will leave a time marker in the notes. And for those of you who want to continue to listen, I will just give a very brief rundown of the way that I read the cards, the positions, and how things unfold. It's a 3-card reading, rarely a 4-card reading. This is probably going to be a 3-card reading as far as I can feel it panning out. The card positions remain constant throughout the new moon readings. So card number 1 is the foundation card. That is something that has already happened, whether it's in the far past, the near past, or multiple times across the past, that is foundational to the reading itself, which is then the card number 2, the main theme of the reading. And that's a theme that will be unfolding over the coming weeks, a sort of activation point being tomorrow morning. But then it could unfold gradually or quickly on a small scale or on a large scale. It all depends on how the cards are going to pan out for you and whether or not it's going to feel more personal or more impersonal, whether it's closer to home or further away. It may not necessarily be something that you see immediately, or it could be something that you can recognize straight away. It's totally dependent on your circumstances and also how it is that you view and interact with the world. So the foundation card works very well in creating an underlying framework that then in some way heralds and or supports the theme card, card number 2. And then the 3rd card is the agency or tool card, and that's the card where you can interact meaningfully in what is unfolding, whether it is by aligning yourself with it or in some way mitigating what's going on. But it's going to be something that is meaningful in a way that kind of complements the foundation card, except the foundation card's meaningful in as much as you should be able to recognize it, but there's going to be little that you can do or nothing because it's already happened in the past. But the tool or agency card is what is immediately available to you in the present and in the coming future. I have, as ever, shuffled the deck. I have cut the deck, and I have 3 cards face down in front of me, and I will turn them over one by one. So I am reading alongside you. In other words, there is nothing that I know ahead of time, and in that way we can, in a certain way, explore the cards together. So the card number 1, which is the foundation card, remember, this is something that, because it's foundational, has happened in the past, and it may be the immediate past, something that is only just beginning to sort of fade out in terms of its activation, or it could be something that is in the distant past, or, as I said, a theme that continues to recur for you throughout your life and that has also just popped up recently. So this is the foundation card. This is key to being in some way the framework on which the theme hangs, and that is the Princess of Cups. Princesses are, to me, simultaneously 2 or maybe even 3 different things. We'll go to the ones that are more practical in terms of the deck and the court cards themselves. Princess of Cups is the youngest of the court cards. In other decks, so for example in the Waite-Smith deck, this would be the Page of Cups. Now the Page of Cups the princess here could represent a young person, a child, or somebody who is young at heart. So it could be in terms of somebody in your life or something in your life that is young at heart and in some way maybe naive, a little bit innocent. When I say naive, I don't mean necessarily naive in the disparaging term that is often used against people, saying that they are clueless, but rather more a childlike, innocent, open way of being in the world. And that can be very much set against the more jaded, more cynical, more kind of practical viewpoint that we have as we get older, something that has been tempered. Our naivety has often been tempered by experience. And so the Princess of Cups can represent that that aspect of somebody else or a young person. It can also represent a situation. So that's the other thing, the other way that it can come up is a situation that is young, new, exciting. As you can see here in the card, it very much speaks of a sense of adventure, a sense of fearlessness, or even in spite of fear, still being able to spread one's wings and take flight and delight in that experience, in spite of, or perhaps alongside, misgivings. You don't have to be entirely fearless with the Princess of Cups, but there is an idea of that feeling the fear and doing it anyway. It can also be an aspect of our personality that is asking to be called forward or acknowledged, because we haven't really embraced the Princess of Cups as much as we could do. Now, from a Jungian perspective, the whole idea of personality development and personality types is that there is constantly a sense of correction or a drive towards correction to find balance. And if we favor being one particular kind of, if we favor a particular stance, or there are certain personality traits that come out in us that are always there, and we become entrenched and sort of overly familiar with them, what will happen is that those unexpressed parts of us will ask to be expressed. And if we find in some way that we are unable to express them, or even unable to acknowledge them, they will then come out in ways that are unexpected. They will come out as a sort of crashing through the unconscious into consciousness, and very often then in their shadow side as well. So you can see with the Princess of Cups, they could come out with a sense of not really thinking things through. And I think there's a very fine balance here between being spontaneous and then being reckless. So the Princess of Cups is asking for expression. If you cannot identify with it, then where is it that she is seeking expression in you? And it doesn't matter whether you're male or female. The Princess of Cups is a kind of expression or an experience that all of us have inside us. Just some of us will find her more accessible than others. And if we struggle to find it accessible, then where is it that the Princess of Cups can really bring an incredible sense of value to our lives and round us out in ways that we hadn't necessarily contemplated before? So in short then, the Princess of Cups can represent somebody who's young or young at heart around us, can represent a situation that's new and exciting and calls for expressions of spontaneous freedom. It can also be aspects of our own personality, that goes hand in hand really, that are asking for expression, or we are actually expressing. We may feel uninhibited, much like the Princess of Cups, in being able to express her, or we may feel inhibited and find that she is somewhat absent, and how is it that we can find her in our lives? And one of the things here is that recently she has become more available. So while I said that the Princess of Cups is something that happened foundationally in the past, what this also suggests, because it's a personality type, is that that she continues to be available. We have access to all of the 16 court cards all of the time. But really here, if there has been an experience of the Princess of Cups, is to know that it is something that keeps reverberating throughout our lives and that we are able to gain access. Or if the Princess of Cups in some way has come out in her shadow form, that we are able to correct back so that there is a kind of moving back towards a moderate middle ground where she is given expression without running riot in our lives and in the lives of those around us. And if you look at her, she's an incredibly romantic character to have running riot as well. So it could also be delightful, even if a little bit scary. And I think that really as I said, the warning sign here is rather, it's not about taking risks, it's about edging into recklessness. And it seems clear here that the protagonist who is most at risk is actually the person who is the expression of the Princess of Cups herself, rather than anyone around. That doesn't mean then to clip her wings, to shut her down, to tell her that she shouldn't be there. There is a moderate way of doing this that doesn't deaden her. So moderation doesn't to me anymore mean a sense of having everything dulled around the edges. That's not it. I think the idea of moderation in everything, including moderation, is really one of the things that is key to living one's life. And to have the sheen taken out of things out of fear of going from one extreme to the other is really not to pay due respect to who it is that we are and what it is that we're capable of, and fulfilling our potential as well-rounded people. But the other aspect of the Princess of Cups, from a more theoretical level of reading, princesses exist separately in various thoughts underpinning, or theoretical thought underpinning tarot. They exist separately from the other cards. So whereas in this deck, the prince, the knight, and the queen are the triad, the sort of courtly triad, the Princess of Cups exists outside of that because her specific job from this particular approach in tarot is that she is the initiatrix of the suit. In a way, not the guardian of the suit, but the actual ignition of the suit. Without the princesses, the suits would not come into being. She is the birth of the cup suit in this particular card. In the same way, if you look at the Princess of Discs in this deck, she is physically a pregnant woman, the birth of discs there. So the princesses are the gateway into or through which the suits are manifested in this world, and without them nothing would exist. So they are a very, very important part of the tarot deck. But if we take that as theory, then what does that mean practically? Well, there are going to be many interpretations, but one of the interpretations that I understand that as meaning, and I'll say it in the context of the Princess of Cups because she is the one who has come up, is that without the experience or without the presence of the Princess of Cups, we would not know what love is. We would not be able to experience it in our lives. We would not be able to be love. So while we have that idea of cups being love, then that's a key part of it. But then all of the other things alongside that. So with our feeling nature, with our heart-based nature, it is also about being able to experience life on a heart level. And that's broader than love then. It's also about feeling sensations in the body. And I know that sounds like it's a discs thing, but this is rather more the etheric body, or feeling things as they come up, feeling our feelings. And also being able to tap into the more subtle aspects of emotions that come up, ones that we wouldn't necessarily be aware of if we were living in a sort of much more heavy, much more disc-like world. But rather this is subtle and light and able to discern and to discover what it is that lies beneath the surface of what it is that we are normally aware of. The Princess of Cups is in some way the ability to gain access to our reserves of feeling that may not have been available to us up until now, which is why in its more specific sense, it is about the idea of the initiation into love. And love in its broadest sense, it may be romantic love, but actually here the Princess of Cups is on her own. This love stems from a love of life. You can see that she is open-armed, embracing life. She's upside down, almost as if she's being birthed, but she's in the sky as well. There is the idea of feeling safe, even while there is nothing there around to support her, because the support comes from within. And the support is some kind of sense of an innocence and an innocent trust in what is happening, and a surrender to what is happening as well. So the two very short phrases that are in English that are on the card, I think sum the card up. And that is, on the one hand, emotional freedom, and on the other, self-confidence. If you take nothing away from this particular card apart from that, it is then to look at where it is that there is a sense of emotional freedom, or the invitation towards emotional freedom, or the awareness of a lack of emotional freedom. And the same thing with self-confidence, where there is a sense of it, where there is an invitation towards it, or where there is a lack. And of course, if there is a lack, then there is, again, that invitation into it. It is possible, it is there, it is for you. That's foundational. That's the Princess of Cups. It has paved the way. She is present, whether you are aware of her or not in your life, whether outside or inside you or both. She is present and is in some way the structure underlying the current card. And that's card number 2, which is the Three of Swords, which is in this deck called Sorrow. Now, you wouldn't immediately feel that the Princess of Cups and the Three of Swords would be a great complement towards each other, or at least they wouldn't be a particularly pleasant complement towards each other. However, I think that when we look at the Three of Swords, we tend to look quite simplistically at it. And if you have listened to any of the interpretations I've done about the Three of Swords, you'll know that it is a far more complex card than you'd first understand. So we'll deal with it at its most simple level, but we will also deal with the complexities that lie underneath that round the card out, that maybe shed different light on the Three of Swords, and to the extent that you may not actually be in the kind of situation that you think that you are when you are in Three of Swords territory, or when you start moving into it. So let's explore this card a little bit more closely and see if we can't round this out. We'll start with the simplest interpretation first, and that is the idea of a love triangle in some way, or the idea of triangulation where there is complexity, and the result of that is feeling in some way closed off from something, shut out, or at least in complicated circumstances where there is no clarity or there's no sort of direct line of sight between you and something or someone else. When I look at the card and the writing on it, I see not clear, doubt, and sorrow. And that's summed up by the picture itself. Very often when Carl Röhrig designs cards where figures are overwhelmed by their circumstances, but spiritually overwhelmed more than anything else, he will draw these very, very sort of light, small figures dwarfed by their surroundings, but almost as if the colour has been emptied out of the figure. And here you can see that the figure practically melds into this panel of what always feels like a door to me, a kind of strange door because it doesn't go all the way up to the top of the page or the card. But the figure is not only dwarfed by this door in front of it, but also is in some way emptied out or depleted by it, or one-dimensional because of it. And I think that also suggests that there is the idea of looking at it one-dimensionally as well. There is only one thing that is making that figure disconsolate, who's feeling that sorrow. And actually, maybe what is called for is to look at it in a more multi-dimensional way. It's also interesting to me, and I think this is the first time that I have ever noticed this, and it's incredible how tarot cards will give up their secrets gradually, even over years of working with them. If I look at the ground in front of the card, so at the front of the card and behind the figure, there is a very, very large shadow that the figure is throwing. And it's almost it's sort of mildly heart-shaped shadow as far as I can see, but it's much bigger than the shadow would normally be. And I think that there is the idea here of something actually being more complex in the mind of the person, the sufferer of this sorrow, than actually is there. That there needs to be something unpacked within in order to deal with the reality of what's going on outside, which has been obscured. Now, sorrow in terms of this idea of a love triangle. Well, if you think about love triangles, the reason why so many of us can relate to them is because they're archetypal. They're never about the actual active triangle itself. Yes, of course. I mean, I'm not saying that what is going on or what will be going on for many of you over the course of this month isn't real. That's not it at all. But what is going on is also archetypally interesting, and possibly for different reasons. The immediate sting of sorrow that so many of us can see here, and you can actually see it also summed up in the swords in the card, where you've got two going one way and one going the other way. It's almost a conflict, is that idea of complexity when all we have wanted is simplicity. And the reason why it is so archetypal is that it goes back, way back into childhood. And I am going to get a little bit psychological here, and you may not necessarily agree with me, but it's certainly the thing that underpins my thinking, is that when we go back into childhood, the bond between primary caregiver, normally mother and child, is one that archetypally is pure. In other words, if it is not interfered with at all, it should be this very, very strong bond between two people, where there is a sort of, the mother gives and gives to the child, and the child receives, and it's a very primal bond. But of course, we live in a world of complexity. We live in a world necessarily that does not go along with the theoretical basis of psychology. And even when a childhood is as uncomplicated as it is, there will always be interference with that bond. The child will never have the mother as much as they want to have the mother. There will always be other things to take up the mother's time and attention, and to take the mother away from the child, whether it is even just for moments. I remember listening to somebody, who was it? It might have been Winnicott. I think it actually might have been Donald Winnicott when he was talking about the fact that really the good enough mother is the mother who can disappoint a child incrementally to where the child can cope with sort of increasing disappointment, and to the point where the child then grows up and becomes independent. So the role of the mother is in his eyes to be good enough, but also alongside that to be able to disappoint in a way that is bearable. And that sounds very bleak, but from a child development point of view, that's exactly what needs to happen. Now, with the sorrow card, we go back into that primal idea of disappointment and that shifting away of the mother being increasingly less available. But if you add the complexity on top of that, of other parties coming in and vying for mother's attention or taking her away, or if the mother herself was absent, whether for a long period of time or even just time enough for the pain to set in, then there is immediately that archetypal idea of the triangle that is activated in us to a greater or lesser degree, and whether it was in a very gentle way, or whether it was something that was really quite life-changing. So sorrow is the archetypal interruption of that beautiful, exquisite idyll that we could or should or did have with our primary caregiver. It is the experience of separation from a source. And it could be, from a more esoteric point of view, it's the separation from God. It's also, from a very human point of view, the realization or the slow dawning embodied understanding of our own separateness from others. When you put it into that kind of context, then you look at our own lives and how we live out that separateness time and time again, how we find ourselves in front of that door, blocked out from the light, and how that may then activate things that are incredibly primal in us and take us back, almost regress us back into that frame of mind of feeling helpless, of feeling like our source of life has been taken away, of feeling like our joy has been taken away, hence the idea of sorrow. And that maybe when we understand in that context what we then relive later on in life is possibly able to be put into perspective a little bit more, that we are not that tiny figure, that we are actually larger, we are grown up now, we have the ability to discern our environment in a much more clear and measured and adult way. And that actually what we're dealing with isn't necessarily what we felt we were dealing with or that we fear that we're dealing with. And if you look at the card, there is light behind that door. And that shadow behind the person is bigger. It's almost as if it's saying, you are bigger than this. You are bigger than you think. Or not necessarily bigger than the archetype, but rather you are able to cope with things much better. And when you're able to cope with that, you can actually look around and see the truth of something, which may be quite different from what you were feeling and fearing it was when you felt very small and it felt like the way was blocked. And I think that this is something that will be coming up in many different forms for over the month, depending on who you are, what it is that you're experiencing. But I think one of the clear things to think about here is that this is not necessarily what it is that you think it is, and it's not necessarily going to turn out the way that you fear it is. And the reason why I say that is because the Princess of Cups is right there, and she is as big in the card as that figure is small. There is a middle ground to be had here between understanding the circumstances that we're in and also being able to throw our arms open to life and embrace it. Embrace it in terms of emotional freedom. Emotional freedom isn't necessarily the freedom to feel just positive emotions, but it is the freedom to embrace what it is that's there and perhaps in that moment to transform it. Self-confidence is an incredibly transformative, it's an incredibly transformative way of being in the world. And that doesn't mean arrogance. That's the shadow side of the Princess of Cups, really. But self-confidence is to know that you can not only bear what is going on, but that actually maybe it isn't entirely what it was that the little part of us thought that was going on. And when the Princess of Cups, who is facing the Three of Swords, is there with her arms open, it is almost as if I'm saying, here I am. I am not shrinking away from this. I am here and I am open to this. But I'm also open to what it is that I am not sure about. I am trusting. I am being held by something inside me that is stronger than the possibly very narrow, very sharp experience of the Three of Swords. The fact that the Princess of Cups stands outside of the triad of the court cards, that she is the initiatrix into the experience, that there is this naivete about her, then also allows her in some way to stand outside the initial experience of triangulation of the Three of Swords, to see something past that, to understand that love is there in spite of that, and love is there because of that, and that the doubts aren't necessarily ones that need to bring one to a standstill, and that perhaps what is going on is more of a shadow of the past than anything that's really actually happening in the present. And that even if a shadow of the past is present and is physically there, that you're different, that this is different, that the Princess of Cups is able in some way to allow you to open rather than close down. And when we open to a situation, it's quite incredible what can happen in terms of how things can change and how things can shift. If we close down the way that we normally do, if you were to close down in the face of something that feels incredibly familiar, and that is because you've closed down every single time before, then things are simply really on the same single track as they've always been. It will be a fairly predictable outcome. Something needs to shift in order for the outcome to shift. And this is where the Princess of Cups, again, is, look at such stark contrast between the two cards, really. The browns and the greys and the shadows of the Three of Swords, and then the blues and the whites of the Princess of Cups, and you've got the feathers, the idea of flight. You've got all kinds of patterns and shades there of things that feel slightly fantastical. There is a fantastical element. It's almost as if she's gone in this sort of slightly surreal way, the other way from the Three of Swords, which is so kind of stodgy and heavy and ponderous, with the red writing that's almost as if it's been written doubt in blood. And that's the idea of doubt. If you look at the Princess of Cups, she doesn't doubt, or if she does, it doesn't stop her from doing what she's doing. And so what she is doing is she is opening herself up to the Three of Swords and that idea of sorrow. She is opening herself up in the face of it because it is there. And actually, if I look at the angle of her arms that she's opening up on a diagonal, there is also that diagonal that's running across the door as well, which is mirrored there. And it's almost as if she is protecting that figure in a small way. It's as if the little childlike aspect of us is being swept up in the arms of this archetypal aspect of us that is there saying, don't worry. That's not to say don't care, but rather to remain open, to be able to feel everything, and to have the self-confidence that there are possibilities that are beyond the scope of your thinking, particularly when you are head bowed in front of this ponderous wooden construction. And then that's when things have the ability to shift, even if only it shifts your perspective, which itself can be a quite radical change. Now, I know in some of my other readings with the Three of Swords, I have gone back to Lon Milo Duquette's work on the Thoth Tarot. And I'm actually going to go back again today because I think it's really worth reading this. And the reason why I'm using this is some of you or many of you who know this deck, it's the Röhrig deck is based on the Thoth deck in terms of the card titles, and I think also some of the feel that the cards bring in. So while I am not a huge adherent of any particular ideology or thinking that underpins cards, I don't follow a particular school of tarot apart from my own. There is something here that is invaluable, I think, in the interpretation of the Three of Swords from a Kabbalistic point of view, and I think it is worth talking about here. So I'm just going to read the passage under the Three of Swords in the book Understanding Aleister Crowley's Thoth Tarot, which is by Lon Milo Duquette. Okay, this is what he wrote. I wrote earlier that because they reside in the supernal triad above the abyss, and just as an aside, you will need to go and look that up yourself because it takes too long to explain that. All the aces, twos, and threes are happy. Obviously, sorrow doesn't sound like a happy card. It is very difficult for us to understand the nature of consciousness above the abyss, where the actuality of things does not exist. In this abstract atmosphere, there are no things or even forms of things, nothing but pure potential. The sorrow of this card is not the same kind of sorrow evoked by, say, the death of a loved one or the loss of a lover. It is a profound state of consciousness that from our below-the-abyss point of view we can only attempt to describe. Sorrow falls pitifully short of an accurate description, but it is probably the best word the English language can offer us. Without forms or reason, the mind must give way to a consciousness higher than itself. The Three of Swords represents the wondrous trance of sorrow that first enlightened the Buddha. We should all be so lucky to draw sorrow from the deck. I think that that's as much as I'm going to explain about that, because words can only get halfway to the meaning, and I think the rest of it is a felt sense of the meaning. And if you want to explore it any more, then what I would do is look at the Princess of Cups to understand possibly a little bit more clearly what sorrow is from that perspective. This idea of sorrow may come up incredibly practically. So while Duquette talks about it not being necessarily the death of a loved one or the loss of a lover, that doesn't mean to say that that idea of sorrow isn't being sparked by an event that's going on. So this may happen on a macro scale, or sort of on a more broad spiritual scale, but it also may be happening entirely practically. But I think it's worth understanding that when it is happening, or if it does happen practically, that there is something much bigger going on at play here. And it's not necessarily big to the extent that you then just, it's not, that in some way is beyond your ability to understand it. But one of the ways that you can access it is through your own personal psychology, through your own past, and understanding that what primal loss is like, and why it is that happens, what it is that it feels like. And then to be able to understand how it echoes in things today. So it may be a specific event that's happening, but it may also just simply be a revisiting of something, a sort of echo that isn't necessarily tangible in form, but really just a coming to terms with something because you're now ready to look at it and feel it, perhaps for the first time in a very long time, perhaps the first time ever. And maybe the only reason why it's coming up is because it is about, in some way, contending finally with an aspect of what that idea of separation means to you, because you are now looking over your shoulder at it and bidding it goodbye in that particular form as you then head on and down the road that you're on. You may encounter it again, but you won't encounter it in the same way, because once you've encountered it and felt it and known it to be something else, then when it happens again, you're able to process and go through that understanding and that realization much more quickly. Again, this is not to minimize anything that happens this month, but rather to understand how it plays into the human condition of a sense of separation, because that's what this is about. It is about separation. And does that separation actually exist underneath it all? It is about mourning necessarily at times, but it is also about knowing that there is at the heart of things the ability to feel everything that's going on. And by doing that, we are affirming not only our own place in life, but life itself. So that's the Princess of Cups as foundational, and how she is able to really awaken various aspects of ourselves in the face of this idea of a lack of clarity around the Three of Swords, whether that comes up, as I said, as a sensation merely in the body, something to be revisited, or as a specific incident. But the Princess of Cups is, as you can see here, and I'll go back and say it again because I think it's really important. She is telling us a different story. She is telling you a different story about the Three of Swords. And I think that that's the one thing that you can take away from this. There is a different story about the Three of Swords, and those stories will vary from person to person. But I think it's worth bearing that in mind. And then the final card, which is the Tool or Agency card. I mean, I think the Princess of Cups is pretty much an agency card here, but let's see what else is going on here in terms of an additional way of seeing things, of interacting, of something that you need to know about what's going on. And that is the Ten of Cups. My first thought when I look at the Ten of Cups is it really is a complement to the Three of Swords, in as much as it is on the other end of a particular spectrum from the Three of Swords. And let's unpack that a little. The Three of Swords is being a three, it's right at the start of the suit. So there are things that have yet to unfold. It's the initial form of complexity that comes in after the Ace, which is pure potential, and then the Two, which is that mirroring idea, and then the Three is that extra thing that comes in that then starts to make things much more complex. The 10 is the end of something, and by the end of something, it doesn't necessarily mean the end, but rather there is a reaching of potential with the 10s. And if you look at the Three of Swords as being the idea of that existential sense of separation from source, or from the source of life, from that primal relationship, whether it's the primary relationship that we have on a spiritual sense or here in this world. The 10 is the marriage of ourselves. It can talk about coming together with others outside of that. It can be about marriage itself, but it is also about the inner marriage. It is the regrouping and the coming together of something that felt like it wasn't there before. So whereas the Three of Swords is the realization of separateness, the Ten of Cups is the realization of oneness. It is emotional fulfillment. It is adult and child together. It is where where our grown-up selves have in some way made peace with our inner child, that we are able to step in where perhaps others were not able to, where we reparent ourselves, but where we also find that reflected in our relationships outside of ourselves, hence the idea of marriage. I would use the word marriage as either specific, but it would also be the idea of meaningful, loving, open relationship. I then go back to the Princess of Cups and think, well, would it be possible without her? No, of course it wouldn't, because as I was saying earlier, the princesses are the heralding of the suit into existence. So without the Princess of Cups, there would be no cups. And then at the end, you've got the Ten of Cups. So you've got the initiatrix of the suit on the one side of the reading, and then you have the culmination of the suit on the other side. And in the middle of that, there is the experience of separateness, of separation, of doubt, of sorrow, which I think is integral to the process. It's almost as if it's a past, present, future reading as well here. That we cannot experience ourselves as one, as whole, as the idea of union, if we cannot also experience what that is not. And of course, this is the world, this is everyday life. It's not going to be perfection, but it is going to be enough. So if you look at the idea of satiety and then you have the idea of the breast, it goes back to the primal relationship of the good enough mother, of the good enough parent, of being full. It's that idea of the well-fed infant who can then, sleep, be cradled in the arms of their caregiver, of their mother, and can sleep in a way that is peaceful. And some of us may have felt far from that in terms of our experience. And what the reading is suggesting is that it doesn't matter in a way that happened. Well, of course it matters, but now there is the ability to experience that sense of satiety and fullness by ourselves on our own terms, in our own way. And the circumstances and the way that looks will be different. Maybe there has been an idea of chasing a kind of perfection that actually doesn't exist in your life because it simply doesn't suit you. That the idea of perfection is some other person's idea of perfection or an external view of perfection. That rather there is here the notion of looking at satiety and what that means for you. Have you been chasing satiety as something that really isn't in keeping with who it is that you are? What fills you up? What makes you satisfied? What helps you to become whole? How does that look in your everyday life? It may not look like anything that you can see around you, and that still doesn't necessarily mean that that's wrong. And the Princess of Cups is really leading this in. She is almost saying that with her arms encompassing the Three of Swords, that needed to happen in order for you to reach this point where you can in some way understand and know for yourself what wholeness is on a certain level. I mean, wholeness itself is a concept that we never reach, I don't think, in this incarnation, in this planet where we are. But it is something that we can certainly feel is good enough. That's that idea again. I love that phrase that Winnicott came up with. Good enough. I think I might have rolled my eyes the first time I heard it because I just thought it was so negative, and it simply isn't. And I think that the Ten of Cups is about that. Is this good enough? Is it good enough for you? If it is good enough for you, then that is good enough. So the Ten of Cups is about reaching a waypoint where in some way something has been fulfilled. And that's not to say then that it needs to end, as I was saying, but that I think due acknowledgement needs to be given to how far it is that you've come, and also to the fact that what you maybe have felt wasn't quite good enough is actually exactly perfect for who it is that you are and where you're at in your life and your surroundings and circumstances and the relationships that you enjoy. I think that one of the things that we look for is textbook experiences in order to validate our progress in life. And actually, any kind of book that were to explain our own unique progresses would be too vast to write. And there are too many subtleties and too many different experiences that go in to any one life to be able to comfortably pigeonhole experiences and say, well, that's the one that's going to, bring you this, or all of these experiences will add up, and then they will, if you've had all of these, then you now are whole. That kind of stuff. It's rubbish. It is really about the Princess of Cups embracing of oneself and one's experiences. And just by immersing yourself in that image of the Princess of Cups, there is an emotional understanding to be reached about where it is that you are. And so the Ten of Cups in and of itself, here being the tool or agency card, is really about you being able to in some way have a kind of reckoning with yourself about your own experiences and how they have brought you to where you are today, and whether perhaps they are more valuable than you had thought, and whether perhaps there are things in your life that are working in ways that you possibly haven't necessarily fully acknowledged, and where it is that emotionally there are things that you are capable of and that you have achieved that maybe a few years ago would have been unimaginable for you. And of course the emotional work keeps going. There is always emotional work to be done. But I think with the Ten of Cups here, it's about acknowledging what has been done, what has been achieved, being able to focus on that, and understanding that it goes hand in hand with the Three of Swords, that these two things are not antagonistic towards each other at all, that they are in some way one and the same experience. The richness of the Ten of Cups would be a little bit too sweet, too saccharine, too false without the Three of Swords. The Three of Swords is the rounding out of human experience, but it's also a gateway through which we can understand that separation and togetherness are two sides of the same coin, and that there is a way of negotiating with ourselves and with others around the emotional experiences to do with separation and togetherness that really brings you to a Ten of Cups kind of sensibility about the whole thing. And again, back to the Princess of Cups, always there, arms open to both. I hope that that has served you in some way. I am hoping to bring out another new moon reading in the next month, but we'll see when that comes. There will definitely be one within 2 months. And also just to draw your attention to a subscriber podcast that I've now released. Very, very nominal membership. Finally, I think I've found something that works where podcasts are shorter and there are going to be more of them, so maybe 2 or 3 a month. And in this particular case, there is one podcast already there, and I will be delving deeper into one of the cards in this reading. And I am going to see which one it is after I've stopped speaking now, see which one draws my attention. And we'll be talking about that for maybe 10-15 minutes. So if you're interested in that, you can sign up via my website. Otherwise, the new moon reading itself is, I'm not keeping something aside, I'm not reserving something from the new moon reading in order that you need to pay to listen to the full story. That's not it. And if you have any questions or comments, then please do ask them or comment wherever you can. If there is nowhere to do that, then feel free to email me, sarah@integratedtarot.com. Otherwise, I will be in touch either in the next 4 weeks or in the next couple of months. Take good care.